Hello, and welcome back to the Wyoming Watch, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle's weekly podcast. I'm Ivy Secrest, your crime and public safety reporter. As the 2026 budget session progresses, two different visions for the budget have been debated on both the House and Senate floors. This week, I spoke with Freelance reporter Carrie Haderlie about what those two budgets are starting to look like and what lies ahead to get a cohesive budget passed. We also took a moment to discuss a few bills that hit close to home for our Laramie County listeners. So today we're speaking with freelance journalist Carrie Haderlie, who contracts with the Wyoming Tribune Eagle to assist in covering the legislative session. Welcome, Carrie.
Hi.
Thanks for chatting with us. I know today we were hoping to talk about the budget because we're at this very interesting moment in the legislative process with the budget. Can you tell me a bit about where lawmakers are in the process?
So in the Senate on Tuesday, senators proposed a second reading budget amendment that would restore the budget back to the governor's recommendation before it was cut back by the Joint Appropriations Committee during the interim. That amendment was approved in a 20-11 vote and proposed by Senator Ogden Driscoll, who called the amendment the Big Beautiful Amendment. He did note that senators would have the opportunity to continue amending the budget bill on third reading, which was scheduled to happen later this week. Senator Lynn Hutchings did urge caution because she was concerned that the House would not agree to a budget bill that restored the governor's recommendation, as the House seemed to favor the Joint Appropriations Committee approach. Over in the House, by Wednesday, the House was still working on its second reading budget amendments on their version of the budget bill. They had worked late into the night, Tuesday night, adjourning at midnight and reconvening at 12:01 a.m. to continue their discussion of 122 budget amendments to their bill. They rejected a measure early on Tuesday to restore their budget bill back to the governor's recommendation.
So Representative Hutchings' concern that the House might not be supportive of restoring the budget is pretty well supported by that then. They've already rejected an amendment to restore the governor's budget.
Yes, and so both versions of the budget bill, as they come out of the House and the Senate, will have to be reconciled by the opposite chamber. That will happen later on in the session during what are called joint conference committees, where lawmakers from each chamber get together and look at all the amendments that are approved in each chamber to try to come together on some sort of agreement. But it likely will be a difficult process through the remaining weeks of the session.
So the difference between these two budgets, tell me, what is the sticking point? Is the House wanting to spend much less than the Senate? Where are those discrepancies?
Yes. So the Joint Appropriations Committee ahead of the budget session cut a significant amount out of Governor Gordon's budget recommendation. The 2027-28 biennium budget was $314.4 million less than Gordon's budget recommendation of $11.1 billion to fund the state over the next 2 years. So the Senate restored much of that funding on Tuesday, and the House remains to be seen in the House whether the over 100 amendments will restore or continue to cut Gordon's budget recommendation.
So what I'm hearing is the Senate is already kind of at this place where they've gone through second reading. They are prepared for the third reading to occur this is coming out on Friday, so it will either have happened by the time people are listening to this, or it will be happening in the very near future. Whereas the House is very much still in this second reading process. They have not come to some sort of consensus on what they want to send through to the Senate. And you mentioned, too, that we've had this moment where they have worked until the early hours of the morning, reconvening a minute after gaveling out for the day, just to keep working through these many amendments. What are some of these sticking points that they're wanting to change from the JAC recommended budget?
A good portion of the funding cuts in the House had to do with Department of Health funding for the Wyoming Business Council, our state's economic development agency, and even some education funding for schools. Other folks have come into the Capitol during the session. Last week, a group of faith leaders convened in the Capitol to ask lawmakers to restore the budget to the governor's recommendation. And, think that it's a difference in philosophy on how the state should spend taxpayer dollars. Representative John Baer, a past chairman of the Conservative Freedom Caucus, has called himself a paycheck lawmaker, meaning that he does not think government spending should outpace the growth of citizens' paychecks. So ultimately, the decision on the budget is a policy one that lawmakers are really struggling with and struggling to come to consensus on this session.
And they don't have infinite time to debate this out. Talk to me a bit about what is the timeline for the budget? When do these proposed budgets switch custody, so to speak?
So the last day for second reading on bills in the House of Origin is Monday, February 23rd. The last day for third reading, the crossover day, is February 24th. Initially, the budget bills were both scheduled for second reading on Tuesday, February 17th of this week. But as we've seen, those negotiations have taken a little longer than expected. So you are correct that there are deadlines for these bills to make it out of their chambers, and we're all just waiting to see how the House and the Senate will deal with those.
Fantastic. And, as we've talked about in our introductory episode to kind of let our listeners know about the session, what is coming up, there is more going on right now than just the budget. As much time as our legislators are putting into, talking through the minute details of the budget, there are also some non-budget related bills that you've also been covering, correct?
Yes. So a fun one came up yesterday to do with Cheyenne. The Senate has thrown its support behind efforts to bring the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association to Wyoming. In January, the PRCA Board of Directors approved a non-binding MOU to consider relocating from Colorado Springs to Cheyenne. So the Senate Appropriations Committee voted 4-1 in favor of a measure to allocate $15 million in Wyoming tourism reserve funding to attract a rodeo and cowboy museum to the Hall of Fame and Hall of Fame to Wyoming. That bill was co-sponsored by, I think, over a dozen senators. So that was an interesting one that came forward. Another one that we are following is a Senate file that would change the zoning protest petition process for multi-unit housing developments in Wyoming. It's the second year that advocates are hoping to change the state zoning protest petition requirements. In the past, these requirements have been very strict, requiring high-level city council votes to approve zoning changes that would allow for apartments or duplex development in Wyoming to help with Wyoming's housing shortage. And this measure would make that bar a little bit more attainable for developers. Another measure that parents might be interested in across the state is a measure to require all school districts to develop a policy governing cell phone, smartwatch, and other smart device use in Wyoming school districts. Right now, there's a hodgepodge of policies in place at Wyoming school districts. Not every school district has a policy, according to Senator Wendy Schuler from Evanston. Last session, Wendy Schuler tried to get a statewide ban on cell phone use in schools, but lawmakers hoped to instead give that decision to local school boards. And this session, she's bringing a bill forward that would simply require school districts to have those policies in place. In Laramie County School District 1, the state's largest K-12 district, there is a policy that governs possession of use of electronic devices, including cell phones, in schools, saying that they must be stored in a backpack or locker at all times during instructional time. But any other district's policies would have to go through their school board process and then be submitted to the state superintendent of public instruction's office.
Does that bill have an effective date by which the school districts would have to have passed a developed policy?
That bill would be effective not later than July 1st, 2026. So each school district board of trustees would have to establish policies by July 21st of 2026.
Fantastic. That's a quick turnaround for school boards.
I know. So I'm actually not, just kind of like for your information, the section 2 of this bill does say not later than July 1st, 2026. Each school district board of trustees shall establish policies required by this section of this act. So it is a quick turnaround, and it's requiring that they do that by July 1st, 2026. So I think most school districts have worked on this. Brian Farmer with the Wyoming School Board Association told the Senate committee today that districts that may not have a policy in place at least have rules within their handbooks, and that some may have to develop an official policy. But he said that because of the allowance for local control in the bill, that most districts would be okay with that.
Fantastic. And if we have local parents or just local constituents who are invested in these PRCA potential or zoning or the cell phones, where is best for them to keep up on this time of year?
Well, obviously, they can keep reading our stories on wyomingnews.com, or the LSO, the Legislative Service Office, has a great website where each bill number is listed, and the public can sign up for alerts and track any legislation they're concerned with there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carrie, for coming on and chatting with us. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Ivy. Have a great day, and I will see you in the Capitol.
See you in the Capitol. Now, here's Taylor Staples, our arts and entertainment reporter, here to give us a roundup of some of the upcoming events in the area this week.
As a disclaimer, this list doesn't include any ongoing events or exhibits happening in town. Today, February 20th, there's a Library to Business drop-in session for adults on the 3rd floor of the library from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., and a Comedy That Cares show featuring California-based comedian Cody Woods at the Metropolitan downtown. Today also marks the second weekend of Shine Little Theater Players' production of Almost Maine, which starts at 7 p.m. both today and tomorrow, and will also be at 2 p.m. on Sunday. Then, Saturday, February 21st, there's a Cheyenne Audubon birdwatching field trip from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., meeting in Lyons Park, a farmer's market from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Cheyenne Depot, a craft and flea market from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at VFW 1881, and a hands-on introduction class to stained glass at the Botanic Gardens at 10 a.m. Saturday night, there's a tacos and tequila fundraiser for the Camilla Shelter at the Beast facility at 5 p.m., as well as the Mule Deer Foundation Cheyenne Chapter Banquet at the Event Center at Archer, also at 5 p.m. Finally, the night ends with an Opera on Tap Wyoming show called A Night of French Opera at 6 p.m. This show will be at Paris West. On Sunday, February 22nd, the Louis Event Venue is hosting an art gallery night from 6 to 10 p.m., highlighting work from local and nationwide artists. On Monday, February 23rd, the library will be playing the movie The Dorothy Day Story as a part of their Matinee Movie for Mindful Aging series from 1:30 to 4 p.m. in the Cottonwood Room. On Tuesday, February 24th, the library is hosting a Tuesday night book club featuring the book The Snow Child from 6 to 7:30 p.m. in the Sunflower Room. And on Wednesday, February 25th, there's a business book club meeting from noon to 1 p.m. in the library's Windflower Room, a teen book club from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. in the library's Sage Room, and a history discussion on the Exodusters movement and Black history in the West from 6 to 7:30 p.m. in the Cottonwood Room at the library. Finally, on Thursday, February 26th, there's the Governor's Prayer Breakfast at 6:30 a.m. at Little America and a teen writing club from 4 to 5 p.m. in the library's Windflower Room. Later, there's an Art Uncorked Paint and Sip event at the Cheyenne Frontier Days Old West Museum from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. and a True Crime Book Club meeting from 6 to 7:30 p.m. in the Windflower Room at the library. For more information and for the full list of events, go to wyomingnews.com/calendar.
In the headlines this week, internal investigations into the growing controversy around conservative activist Rebecca Bextel of Jackson handing out $1,500 checks on the House floor have been temporarily paused while the Laramie County Sheriff's Office pursues a criminal investigation of the incident. The incident, being referred to as Checkgate, continues to draw attention in the legislature and outside of Cheyenne. The checks originated from a Jackson donor but were handed out by Bextel, who's been advocating for legislation that would end housing mitigation fees that fund affordable and workforce housing in places like Teton County. They were intended for 10 lawmakers, at least some of whom received them at the Capitol. And after months of proposed plans, a demolition clause, terminated contracts and delays, the long inactive historic pump house on Ames Avenue is finally moving towards renovation and use. Members of the Cheyenne City Council are now considering a new professional design services agreement with the Designs Studio Incorporated, which was discussed for the first time at the Council's Finance Committee meeting Wednesday. Thank you again for tuning into Wyoming Watch. Tune in next week for more local news.